Hey everyone, we're going to get started here in probably just another 60 seconds or so. Give everybody one more moment or so to log in, and then we'll get started. Thank you. All right, everybody, why don't we go ahead and get started? It's top of the hour, class is starting, so let's do it. So welcome to everybody that's joining today. Let me go ahead and turn on my video real fast. There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Brothheim. I'm the training manager at Sumo Logic, and I'm going to be leading today's sessions. So you are here for hopefully the whole day. You're going to be able to join us, but we have a lot of planned for you, and we're just going to dive in. I also have one of my peers, and another peer might join on a little bit later to assist. So Anna Atta is in the chat. I know I didn't pronounce her name correctly, but she's going to be assisting today. So any questions you guys have, go ahead and put them in the chat, and either she'll assist or direct you to appropriate resource. And let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to turn off my video just to save a little bandwidth. It was being kind of flaky, but we're just going to go. So today we're together for a lot of time. Which is great, a full day together. We've split today up into two different sessions. The first session is going to be Cloud SIEM fundamentals. The second session is going to be Cloud SIEM administration. They build upon each other, as it's probably fairly obvious. And so we're going to go through one class today, and then we're going to go ahead and do the other class in the afternoon. I say morning and afternoon for you guys being mostly APAC based. I am based in the United States, if my accent did not give it away. So I am based in Portland, Oregon, on the west coast of the United States, Pacific time. So it's my afternoon. So I might get a little confused with the times, but regardless, we're together for a while. So what are we going to be doing together besides just hanging out? Well, we're going to go through these classes. Now, the first class is going to be, like I said, Cloud SIEM fundamentals. And so we're going to be together for the next 3 hours. We're then going to take a break for lunch or dinner, and then we're going to come back for that administration class. So what are we doing in that first 3-hour block? Well, here's our agenda to get more specific. And I think that you guys had a pretty good agenda in the invite. So you might know what we're already going to do, which is great. But if you don't, this is kind of the plan. So 3 hours together, we're going to start with the review of the Cloud SIEM data pipeline. What is Cloud SIEM? What is the data pipeline? Why do we care? And go through some of that. Then we're going to be doing some labs. Today, I don't want to just sit and read slides to you for the next 8 hours because that's not fun for either one of us. And so we want to make today interactive. And so we're going to be flipping a lot between, we will be doing a bunch of slides. I can't get out of the slide deck for this class or the next one, but we will be integrating with labs. So we'll do a bunch of slides and we'll go in and do a lab or two together, and we'll log in together. We'll do stuff and see why Cloud SIEM is important and helpful. Then we'll do some more slides. Then we'll do some more labs back and forth. So we're going to be doing that for the first 2 hours. We'll take a break in about 1 hour 15, but for the first 2 hours is going to be those labs, those slides, and class. Now for the third hour, excuse me, so many times here. The last hour, we're going to be taking a certification exam. Or actually, you're going to be taking it. I've taken it already. So we're going to actually be taking 2 certification exams today. We'll talk about them later. Don't get stressed about them. Please don't get stressed about them. They're free for you, free for your organization, and we'll go through those details later. So kind of strap in for the next 3 hours. So next 2 hours of content, labs, then we'll take that exam, we'll take lunch, we'll come back, we'll do another class with labs and content, and then we'll take another exam. Now, normally we would do actually it's missing my most important slide here. Our voucher for Uber Eats. So normally we would do these classes in person. and we'd get the honor to come down to Sydney or wherever, traveled all over the world doing these classes. And part of the fun of being together is we get to eat together. Well, unfortunately, we can't now due to the world. And so what we want to do is still kind of incentivize you, bribe you, whatever the verb is that motivates you. But we want to give you some food essentially. So by attending today's class, check. By completing the exam, which you'll do soon, check. All you need to do is send that certificate to us. I'll put this address later, so don't worry about it. And we'll send you a $15 Uber Eats voucher. Since you're going to be taking 2 exams today, assuming you stick through the whole day, you'll be able to request 2 vouchers and you'll be getting $30, which is enough for a sandwich probably. But so we wanted to give you something. So that's hopefully a little motivation to enjoy today. All right. I'm going to go ahead and just start going here. So let's go. There we go. So the first thing I want to do is review the Cloud SIEM data pipeline. And by review, define. You may not be familiar with the Cloud SIEM pipeline, and that's perfectly fine. We're going to start from the basics, but this is what we want to talk about first. So before we get into the Cloud SIEM pipeline and talk about the importance of it, well, what is Cloud SIEM? That's the name of the class, probably a leading factor in driving you today. But what does it mean if you don't know? So what is Cloud SIEM? So very simply, Cloud SIEM is a cloud-based enterprise-grade security information and event management system. And that's where SIEM comes in, security information and event management, SIEM. We'll refer to it as Cloud SIEM today. I'm not going to call it Cloud Security Information and Event Management System too many times. Cloud SIEM is going to leverage Sumo Logic's core functionality, which is going to include data collection, ingestion, storage, as well as threat intelligence. Cloud SIEM is a purchased add-on with an ever expanding, easy to say, library of content designed for security operations. And because it's designed for larger data volumes, most organizations need to ingest a large amount of data each day for insights to surface in Cloud SIEM. Now, as we'll see in a little bit, Cloud SIEM is going to be a feature of Sumo Logic, which we're going to play with. If you are missing that feature or you want that feature added, you'll want to reach out to somebody more on our account side. So either somebody in one of our SEs or one of our support individuals, and they can assist with that. I can also take information, get it to them, but ultimately you'll want to reach out to somebody that's working with you already on your Sumo account. All right, now let's look at this pipeline. There's a lot going on here, and we're going to go through, well, of course, all of it, but we're actually going to split up the pipeline into 2 halves today. First half, we're going to look at in one portion of the class. The second half, we're going to look at in the afternoon portion of the class. But let's go through the whole pipeline just to get a feel for it. So Cloud SIEM is a pretty powerful tool. What it's going to do is take millions of log messages, potentially, and funnel them down into a handful of actionable security insights. So how does that work? Well, it goes through the pipeline. So at the very top of the pipeline, waiting for my little, there we go, my little pink highlighting there. What's going to happen are those logs are going to be collected and ingested by Sumo Logic into messages. So millions of log messages come into Sumo Logic and then get turned into messages. Or not turned in, but they're collected and are messages. Once those messages have been collected, then the second step is going to happen, or the second level, which is going to be the parsing, the mapping, and enrichment, and turning those into Cloud SIEM records. So taking those millions of messages and turning them to records with valuable information. I'm, of course, going to look at that information shortly. Now we have all these records. What happens to those? Well, the records are going to be compared to rules. And if a rule is triggered, an entity will be extracted, a severity score is going to be assigned, and a signal will be created. Now, those terms of entity, severity score, and signal may be foreign to you. We're going to go through those throughout today many times as well. So you'll learn that vocabulary quite quickly. So once that record is gone through or is compared to the rules and possibly something is triggered, then we get a signal. Now, once we have a whole bunch of signals together and they correlate or cluster together, essentially, they become an insight. Now we're going to focus on the later stages of this pipeline, which is really the bottom half of this, this chart in this class. The top half, the collection and ingestion, parsing, mapping, enrichment, we'll focus on in the afternoon portion. So for today, we're going to kind of assume the data has already arrived in Sumo Logic, and now we want to apply rules to it, signals, what are entities, all that together. So that's kind of the division. Now let's take this and go through it just a little deeper. Sorry, there we go. So going through this, just like I said, just a step deeper, might be a little repetitive, but repetition is good sometimes. So what we want to imagine is we have a company, and in this case, we're going to use the example of Sumo Logic Coffee. Sumo Logic Coffee, or our company, is going to collect and ingest millions of log messages into Sumo Logic, as just described. Typically, we can, or you can, use these messages right away in Sumo Logic apps, but to use them in Cloud SIEM Enterprise, which is what we're going to be using today, your administrator must enable data forwarding. Your admin is also going to need to create log mappings, field extraction rules, and other pre-processing steps to extract the right data. Now, once again, that's really more focused in that admin class, but it's still part of that pipeline. Now, once the messages have made it past that step, now the messages need to go through some processing, and this processing is going to need to occur first before Cloud SIEM can generate the security insights. So Cloud SIEM is going to take or process the messages and turn them into records. Each record is going to contain the information from a message, and that's going to be parsed into key value pairs, which are then going to be mapped to a Cloud SIEM schema and enriched with other data. Once again, a little more focus in the afternoon on that, but we're going to look at an example right now. A very simple example, but a good illustrative example. And that's what I'm looking at right here, or what you're looking at. What I want to do here is I want to follow a simple log message down this pipeline that I just described. So first, the message is going to be parsed and extracted from the record. And on the left-hand side of the screen, we see our message. Then what's going to happen is it's going to be mapped into a set of key value pairs. And this process is really going to be important for a few reasons. One is that it's going to fix some basic formatting. It's also going to create semi-structured data. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a value of IP-127-0-0-1, which is not really anything. Now, what the parsing is going to do for us, and what we kind of mentally do, is the parsing is going to extract the IP address into a key value pair and normalize the value of 127.0.0.1 with dots instead of hyphens. So we go from the left-hand side of the screen with something that humans might read and recognize as an IP address, but we needed the system to. And that's what's occurring on the right-hand side of the screen, is the system has now said, okay, call this thing, or we've told the system to call this thing source device underscore IP, and it attributes that value to it. Now, once that message is, once that value is parsed out, more enrichment can take place. The record can be enriched with information from match lists or threat intelligence databases, such as threat level. And so what we're seeing here is the system has found this IP address and it views this threat level as low, which is probably makes sense. It's a, well, it can be used as a malicious IP address, but it's typically it's a home-based IP address. So these normalized records, once they go through all these steps, are then sent down the Cloud SIEM pipeline and compared to rules. Continuing down the pipeline. Each record ingested into Cloud SIEM is going to be compared to hundreds of built-in and custom rules. And we're going to look at those rules pretty soon. If a rule is triggered, an entity will be extracted and a signal is created. If a record, there we go, my clicks, come on, there we go. If a record matches the criteria specified in a rule, then Cloud SIEM is going to create a signal. The severity is going to be a score, and it's going to be a number between 1 and 10 that tells Cloud SIEM how serious the potential threat is. 1, not too serious. 10, very, very serious. When a signal is created, it's going to contain a name, an entity, a severity, a stage, and a description. A signal is always going to contain at minimum an entity and a severity score. And this data is defined by the rule, and that's going to be later used by Cloud SIEM's Insight Engine algorithm. Now, I've mentioned the term entity a few times, and I want to be more specific in what it is. The entity in a signal is going to be something like an IP address, a MAC address, a host name. It's going to be essentially a noun. It's going to tell us who or what was involved in the event that the record described. Entities are going to be extracted from the records, and every signal is going to have an entity. The entity's activity score is going to be the sum of all the severity scores of all the signals it appears in. And we'll go over that equation and that math of how that activity score is calculated. As just described, the activity score is the sum of all the severity scores, but we'll look at a better example of that, more visual example of that, probably about half an hour or so. All right, now really just to kind of finish up the pipeline. So Cloud SIEM is going to take everything one step further, and it's going to correlate those signals and turn them into a manageable number of insights. An insight is going to be a group of signals clustered around a single entity. So around a single IP address, a single host name, et cetera. An entity is going to be created when the sum of the severity scores of signals with the same entity goes above a certain activity score within a certain time frame. So essentially an insight is going to be created when the severity scores go above a certain level within a certain period of time. Now there is a default that's set for that. You'll have the ability to modify it, but by default, it's going to be an activity score of 12 within the last 14 hours. That will create a insight. Once again, we'll go over those numbers and that math a little bit later, but very simply, it's an activity score of 12 within the last 14 days. So if you had a rule that has a severity score of 6 and it gets triggered twice, an insight would be created because you'd have 6 plus 6, which is 12, an activity score of 12 within the last 14 days. Once again, ignoring the math kind of side of things, but essentially when those insights get together, that's when those signals get together, that's when the insight's created. Now, once the insight is created, we can start a security investigation, or maybe we take an action like alerting our SOC teammates or executing playbooks. And we're going to look at that functionality throughout the next hour or so. All right. Let's see, any questions so far? All right, I think we're going to start our first lab already. Oh, one more screenshot or slide. And this, the bubble text in here is kind of blocking everything. We'll look at the better example of this in a moment. Well, this is what we're going to be going through, a portion of what we're going to go through today in the Cloud SIEM enterprise environment is this Insight Radar. And so we'll go through it. Let's log in and go through it. This is the bubble of kind of blocking things. So let's just log in together. So let me go ahead and share the credentials we're going to utilize today. Put them in the chat, and I'm going to explain them if you've never logged in with us before. So we're going to use a set of training credentials today because we want to use our data. So we want you to use our environment. The address is service.sumologic.com, which you hopefully know how to log into Sumo. If not, I shouldn't have left. You may not have before, but this is the website we will use, is service.sumologic.com. And the email you're going to use is training plus analyst number. Now, I want you to select a 3-digit number. Maybe you want to be training plus analyst 007, training plus analyst 321758. Pick a 3-digit number. And then use the password of Feb 2022 exclamation mark, to log in. So once again, training plus analyst number, you select a 3-digit number, password, whatever, Feb 2022 exclamation point. If you can't copy, that's going to be a functional, you'll just have to, I apologize if you can't copy Chris. I'll see if that's a web setting. I don't think it is, but I apologize for that. So once you get logged in, if you can go ahead and let me know that you're logged in by letting me know the number. If we have overlap in the numbers, it doesn't matter. We're in a pretty small group. So, well, actually we're a fairly large group, we have 60 people. But even if there's overlap in the numbers, it doesn't matter for today. When we save things, as we'll do periodically, we're going to put our names or we'll use our initials or something like that. So. If you have any questions about logging in, let us know. Honestly, it's probably going to be a typo, but that's okay. Let us know. I'm going to put those credentials back in. What else about them? So keep in mind, these are training accounts or training credentials. In this training environment, don't put anything proprietary. As you're seeing, you may be sharing a set of credentials with somebody else, so we don't want to save anything, them, or we want our managers to see. We're not going to, but you also have access to these credentials after today. We'll use them in the afternoon, but you'll have access to them going forward so that you can go into the environments and I was going to say play around, but work is probably a better way to describe it. All right, the other thing I'm going to do, I should have done that while you guys were getting in it, is I'm going to share a lab guide. So I'm pasting it into the chat. Hopefully you can download it as a PDF. If you can't, probably just watch along. The labs are interactive. I'm going to do them on my screen. So even if you can't do the labs, or you can't get that PDF, you'll still be able to participate because I go through things kind of slowly anyhow. So, all right, so let me go ahead and log in. So logging in, I am going to use 234. And the password feb2022 exclamation point or bang. And then I should have my, there we go. There we go. Web guide. Not web guide, lab guide, excuse me. If you can't log in, I suggest changing a 3-digit number. Try just a different 3-digit number. And if you completely can't log in, you'll still can follow along. These labs, like I said, I'm going to do them on my screen, so you'll still get value from them. I hope you can participate, but if you can't, you'll still, like I said, should be able to get something out today. All right, so I have my lab guide. I am in Sumo Logic. I may be on a screen that's very busy like this. Ideally, though, I want to go to my home page. So this is ideally the page you're on. If you're not, it doesn't really matter because we're not really going to be using this page anyhow, but this is Sumo Logic. So like I kind of joked before, I hope you've been in here before, but if you haven't, this might be your first time coming into Sumo. So the home page is a pretty traditional home page. It's going to get you up and running, or ideally get you up and running, give you access to look at certain things. We're not really going to be using those things today. Those are other classes, but that's what you're looking at. We have a Learn tab. As a training manager, if I didn't point out the Learn tab, I probably wouldn't be doing my job. So a great place to learn more about Sumo Logic. We have videos, we have documentation, labs, just all kinds of stuff. And then certification. We'll actually go in here later, actually twice later today, to take our certification. So this is where we'll go to, but I don't want to get into that now. What I do want to get into now is the black bar on the far left. So the black bar may be hidden. If it is, click on the 3 horizontal lines, the hamburger icon as we call it. That should expand it. Once it's expanded, or if it's expanded already, we want to go to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So on this left black nav bar, there should be Cloud SIEM Enterprise. Now, if you don't see that, well, you should. In these accounts, you will see this. If you don't see it in the real world, though, this means your account does not have Cloud SIEM Enterprise enabled, and that's where you'd want to talk to your account manager or support. And like I said, I can help you get to the right person. But for today, we're going to click on Cloud SIEM Enterprise, and what should happen is Cloud SIEM Enterprise should open up. And you should get a screen that looks very similar to this, minus my Okta password. All right, so hopefully you got to this screen. If you did, you've now completed level lab 0, which is great. We're going to do more, of course, but wanted to get there. So hopefully you're in here. Now, what are we looking at in here? What we're looking at is, well, there's a lot going on, but let's go through it. Let's start with the far left. What we're looking at here is the Cloud SIEM heads-up display. And on the far left, what we're seeing here is a time period, 24 hours by default. And we're seeing those records, those signals, and those insights. And what we're seeing, or what I hope is apparent to you, is the scale of what's happening. Remember earlier, the system can handle millions of records and turn them into a few insights, and that's what's happening here. Over the last 24 hours, 25,000 records have been ingested or come into Sumo Logic. Of those 25,000 records, 130 of them had signals had signals or turned into signals. Now, of those 130 signals, there were only 3 insights, meaning over the past 24 hours, there's really only 3 things that we as a Cloud SIEM expert here or somebody that's going to use this tool are going to utilize. So we now can say, we don't need to look at 25,000 messages. We just need to look at 3 insights. And that's what we're going to do shortly, is start to look at those insights and then decide what to do with those insights and all that. But that's what is being presented to us. Now in the first lab, lab 1, part 1, what it wants us to do is utilize the filtering of time and basically see how the values change with the records and the signals. So for example, by default, it's set to the last 24 hours. If you want to see how many records have been ingested in the last 8 hours, we can change the pull down to 8 hours. And now we see records. 1B is asking how many signals in the last 7 days. So once again, we'll take the online, not the online, the time, change to the last 7 days. And now we see signals. Now look at this. So 171,000 records over the last 7 days, 912 signals, and just 21 insights. And so that's boiling down really the thing we need to look at. What else do we see in here? So the other lab questions, how many insights have been created in the last 24 hours? So once again, 24 hours, insights, and then we see there's been 3. We also see on the left-hand side of the screen the insights by status. So what we're seeing here is, once again, those 3 insights, but that they're new. If somebody had already accessed them, they would change their status. So maybe there were 3 in the last 24 hours, but somebody working the earlier shift or one of my peers or what have you went in and worked those insights, and they might be changed to in progress or closed. Well, by seeing that they're new, that means they're untouched, and I should probably start to utilize them or work on them rather, excuse me. Good. Now, step 2 or lab 1, step 2, I guess we call it, is the insight radar. And this I was trying to show earlier in the slides, but it didn't really, the image wasn't that great. And this is a better example. What we're looking at here is a HUD, heads-up display, showing us our records, our signals, and our insights in this ring or around this ring. The ring starts at the very top. So we essentially have midnight, and then we go around the ring, and we start to see the records. Records are represented by this blue line. And with this blue line, we see the peaks and valleys. So we can start to tell when the most amount of records got ingested, as well as when the least amount of records got ingested. The middle ring is signals. So here we see there were lots of records and only a handful of signals, or in some case, no signals. We also see the higher bar or taller bar represents the more amount of signals, the greater amount of signals. And then finally, in the middle, we have our insights represented by our triangle. So the first lab 2A is asking what time were the most records ingested in the last 24 hours? So for the most records, we'd want to look for the highest peak in this blue bar or blue ring. And so we see it is over here. Your time zones, I don't know what they're going to show. So at least for me, I see it over there, and you should see a peak somewhere. I don't know if it'll show up as 9 a.m. or not. Should localize time though. Signal. What for 2B? What time were the most signals created? So we're looking for the highest bar, and kind of showed it already here. So we see here most signals were created. Fewest signals. Well, there's a lot of spots where there were 0 signals, and so those are the fewest. And then finally, the insights, as mentioned, the triangles show it. But keep in mind, not a huge important thing to notice, but the triangles might represent more than one insight. So if I had 2 insights occur during the same time period, there might be 1 triangle, but there could be 2 insights. And so just wanted to mention that. Now this HUD, this heads-up display, should be kind of enticing and inviting. It should remind you of a video game type of feel. It might remind you of a military feel, which, but it's intended to be interactive and inviting. The individual who created it, excuse me, did some work on World of Warcraft, which is a pretty popular video game. And so it's meant, like I said, to kind of evoke, not emotion, certainly, it's certainly more informative, but meant to be an easy way to see what's going on. All right, so that should get us through lab 2C. And now we're going to go ahead and look at lab 1, step 3. Now what we want to do is bring you to the top bar up here. And specifically the rules. We want to start to look at these rules. I described these rules earlier, but we haven't looked at them yet. And so I want to show some of these. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and really quite simply as described, we're going to go ahead and go to content. Go to content, there we go. And we should have a little pull down here. And now select rules. When we do, we're going to see all the rules in the system. There's going to be about 614. Curious how close I am. It changes all the time. All right, 652, we've added more. What's occurring is we will add new rules all the time, and we'll talk about that in more later, both later today and more in the afternoon. But rules are being added all the time by Sumo Logic. And so we're seeing these rules now. And what we want to show you here is the ability for you to filter the rules based on whatever filter you want to apply. So hopefully there are no filters up here. If there are, I'd encourage you to remove any. And then we want to use the filter here to start to look at rules that match the filter. So for example, as it says in 3A, if we wanted to look for all the rules that contain the word firewall, we can go ahead and go to the filter, do name contains, and firewall. Actually, it shouldn't be contained phrase starting. Oh yeah, that will work actually, because it doesn't. It's just to do the phrase, not at the start of the rule. And so we should see 11 rules. Ideally, you see the same amount as me. Yeah, hopefully you do. Now, when we're seeing these rules, we're seeing information about the rules themselves. And one of the things is severity score. So as we look at these rules, we see some are more than severe. Here's an AWS network firewall alert that has a severity of 5. Here's an excessive firewall denies that has a severity of 1. One is more extreme, not extreme, more severe than the other. And so that's what those are starting to denote. And then shortly as they start to match these rules, we're going to use these scores and add them up and see if they meet a certain level to turn into an insight and a signal, kind of all that. All right, so if the question is how many rules have a severity score greater than 8, we can go ahead and add an additional filter, and we can do severity. Should be severity, severity greater than 8. Now, I don't know if there's going to be anything. The reason there's nothing here is we're using two filters here. Excuse me, sorry. So what we're doing is saying looking for firewalls and severity of 8, and there are none. But if we get rid of the firewall rule and just look for those rules that have a severity of 8 or greater, then we should see those. The question was, how is the severity decided for the insights based on what parameters? It's based on just really internal decision on what to denote those as, but you'll have the ability to modify those. And that's an important feature is we, or the system is saying this is extreme or this is severe, this isn't, but it's going to be up to you as an individual organization to decide, because we'll talk about it a little bit later, but one thing that's severe, highly severe to you might not be highly severe to another organization. And so we'll talk about how to modify these rules to make them more appropriate for your severity and your risk tolerances. All right, last portion here is 3C. How many rules detect the persistence tactic? We'll talk about tactics a little bit later, but basically we can go ahead and we should be able to go into our tags and do tags contain tactic. And then we see a bunch of different tactics. These tactics are related to what are called MITRE attacks and a MITRE attack framework, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's if you're aware of it, it's really helpful. If you're not aware of it, it's okay. The system will teach you about it. So if I want to go ahead and look for that tactic of persistence, put it in the filter, filters like it should, and I should get some results. There we go. So about 95. All right. Last portion here is lab. Actually, there's a few more here. Step 4. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go and look at the entities. So we are looking currently at content, but now we're going to go up to the top of the screen and select entities. And these entities are these, I said nouns earlier, I don't know if that's the best way to say it, maybe proper nouns, but these are going to be identification, a way to identify things. A username, a host name, an IP address, those are going to be the most common, but there are going to be other ways. But this is going to be really helpful. And so here the system has found or identified 31 entities, 31 things, and started to provide scores to those as well. And so what we can do is we can start to use the filters to look at these activity scores. Same idea. If we wanted to look for those that have an activity score of 5 or greater, activity score greater than 5. Actually, I take that back. If we wanted to do 5 or greater, it should actually be activity score greater than or equal to 5. And then we see 3. How many entities have a score of 0? So same idea, activity score is 0. And now we're starting to see those as well. And so an entity, I guess it's the discussion question, but what is an entity with an activity of 0 means is basically the entity has been found, but there's nothing recent associated with it. We're going to look at other entities in the records soon. Yeah, coming up as well. All right. So we looked at entities, we did some filtering. Filtering might not be the most exciting thing in the world, but it is important to just know how we do it. Every system does filtering a little bit different. Now what I want to show, very simple icon, is the top left. By clicking on this, this will take us back to the heads-up display. So anytime we want to go back up to the back home, essentially, to the heads-up display, excuse me, we'll click there. Something else, I don't think this is actually part of the lab, but kind of bonus feature, is we can actually go back into Sumo Logic through this interface as well. If we go to the top right and we go to Switch Apps and click on this 9-dot square icon, we can click on or select Continuous Intelligence Platform, and then that's going to take us back home to kind of traditional Sumo Logic. So have my heads-up display or my Cloud SIEM enterprise environment, and then I have Sumo Logic. So just wanted to show that as a way for navigation, which is pretty important. All right. Now what we're going to do next, we go ahead and let me just get back to the labs, just excuse me, the slide, just to kind of keep me honest here a little bit. Yeah, I got a few slides to go through before our next group of labs. So let's go through these. Okay, so what we did in lab 1 was very simply looked at the summary stats on the left-hand side of the nav screen. We looked at the Insight Radar on the HUD in the middle portion of the screen. We looked at the built-in rules that come with Cloud SIEM. We didn't discuss how to modify them yet, but we've just looked at them and confirmed they exist. And then we saw the entities that are being tracked. And that's where we got to, which is good. That's a good place to start, of course. All right, let me go ahead. Looks like there's a question. I'm going to go back to it. We're going to go to the question there. We're going to go through this a few times, but I want to answer the question because it's important. The question is just going over records, signals, and insights again. And so I'm going to use this chart to start. I'll go through it. Well, this should be good. So first we have all of our data coming through, which are our messages. So at this point, it's just Sumo Logic collecting messages. Now those messages don't become records automatically. They have to be converted into records that Sumo Logic or Cloud SIEM can handle or understand. And we're actually going to go through that portion in the afternoon as well. So in order for those messages to become records, the system or something has to standardize them. And that's what's happening here when they turn into records. They're essentially being standardized. The message is being looked at and converted, and data is being extracted and converted into a record. So now we have a bunch of records. Now, those records, they might be good records, they might be bad records. We don't really know. The system doesn't know. So now the records are going to be compared to rules. They're going to be compared to rules that exist in the system that Sumo has created, as well as rules that you can create. And we're going to talk about that shortly. When those rules are looked at, or when those rules are examined against the record is going to extract the entity, because it's going to be important that you or the system knows who or what is actively involved with it. Is it an IP address? Is it a host name? Is it a computer name? And so that information is going to be shown in that signal. So the record is going to be not scrubbed, but viewed and turned into that. Now from there, we can go ahead, or not we can go ahead, the system is going to correlate all these signals and turn them into an insight. So a bunch of signals are going to turn into a single insight. So you have a large amount of records. Those records are going to be compared to the rules. Based on the rules matching and grouping together the entities, those are going to be turned into signals. And then when we have a large amount of signals, those are going to be insights. And those are really what we're going to be looking at. Those are the things we want to examine, because that's the system telling us, hey, all this other stuff I looked at, I've boiled it down into insights. And then we can look at them and do something with it. And we're going to do that shortly. So I hope that clarifies a little bit. Let's go ahead and jump back into the deck here, because I want to go through an example now. There we go. So we have a few different examples. There we go. Let me load it first. All right. So we have a few different examples and use cases that we can utilize today. We'll pick one of these, but I wanted to go through the options here, and we'll do one together, maybe even two, but you can do some of these on your own as well in the lab guide. But let's go through these. So what are some different use cases that Cloud SIEM can help with? Well, financial logic. Imagine Financial Logic is a major player in the banking industry, and they meet all the GDPR and all the other international compliance standards. But their big worry is still being a target for hackers. So that's Financial Logic's big concern. Sumo Pharma, a healthcare company that ships prescription medication to patients. They meet all their HIPAA standards and guidelines, but they're concerned about data privacy, And so they want to monitor all their data to make sure that all their patients are safe and healthy in the digital world as well. And then we have Sumo Coffee. It's a small retail business with a big tech idea, automating the entire coffee business from bean to cup. In addition to consumer protections like PCI DSS, their main concerns include keeping computing costs down while their startup grows. So we have three unique companies that have three different needs. How can we help with that? Well, threat investigation is how we're going to start to help with that. Threat investigation is going to be reactive, while threat hunting is proactive. And typically, threat investigation is going to happen in response to an alert. Once you've investigated a threat, you can hunt for similar threats and take precautionary steps to prevent attacks from happening again. Threat investigation is an iterative scientific process, very similar to troubleshooting. In both threat investigation and troubleshooting, you're first going to monitor your system. Once an anomaly is detected, you can make a hypothesis about how it happened and diagnose the problem. As you dig deeper, you may want to revise this hypothesis and find more clues about why or how the attack ever happened. And as you investigate and trace these events, you're going to want to start to answer as many of these WH questions about the event to tell the story. So who is behind the event? What assets did the event affect? Where did the event occur? When did the event occur? Why did the event occur? and how did the event occur? Once you've started to look at that or answer those questions, you can start to take action to resolve the issue. Now, there's many actions you might take in response to an incident. You might work with your IT team to isolate, wipe laptops that might be infected with malware and prevent those from spreading malicious code. You might need to work with HR to enforce mandatory anti-phishing training to prevent your employees from future attacks. So the approach you take the action you take will vary, of course, based on your organization. Now I want to show a day in the life of a SOC analyst utilizing Cloud SIEM, because Cloud SIEM is going to help with every step of the threat investigation process. First, Cloud SIEM is going to automatically detect and monitor potential threats by analyzing those millions of records and distilling them down into a handful of insights with a very low false positive rate. As you saw earlier, you can choose those insights from that homepage of Cloud SIEM. Now, once you have your insights, you can start to dig through the raw logs and the signals to start to conduct deep dive investigations and even proactive threat hunts. And we're going to do this together shortly. So we're going to take a look at the insight and start to look at those signals, look at those entities and start to see why this was clustered together and why this is concerning, why the system thinks it's concerning. Then we can create a hypothesis. We can organize our thoughts. We can take notes about the investigation and put comments for each insight. And then we can share these ideas with our SOC teammates to help us keep track of the investigation. We can also take certain direct actions from the insight. So as you'll see shortly, you have these actions. You can automatically email your teammates. You can create a Jira ticket. You can execute a playbook, as well as many other custom actions with the actions button. And then finally, you can update the insight. You might mark it as in progress. You might mark it as closed. When you close it, you can mark it as resolved or false positive or duplicate or no action. And by updating the status correctly, you're going to help the Cloud SIEM Insight Engine produce more accurate insights for your org in the future. Now, this next slide here, I referred to this earlier, this MITRE attack. It may be something you're familiar with. It may not be. And if you're not, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. You're not going to be tested on this, so you don't have to get too deep into this, but I did want to cover it because it's something we use, this MITRE attack matrix. This MITRE attack matrix is published by a group called MITRE, which is a nonprofit research organization. An attack, if you notice, the word attack here is spelled kind of creatively. It stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. Now, this framework organizes and categorizes the tactics and techniques that criminals, scripters, nation states, and adversaries might use. It's going to include attacks like exfiltrating databases, installing malware, stealing credentials, and other nefarious activities that you and your SOC team are trying to stop. And so Cloud SIEM is going to use these same tactic names for the stages of signals as well as the name of insights. So once you're familiar with attack, or if you are, navigating Cloud SIEM's insight pages becomes easier. Once again, if you're not, that's perfectly fine. It's not something you need to learn for today, but if you do know it, it just helps a little bit. Basically, it's a framework that will automatically categorize your information or categorize everything, and we use it as well in Cloud SIEM. Let's see, a couple more slides. So based on the MITRE attack tactics and techniques, which might our fictional companies utilize? Well, I'm going to tell you because you might not know, but let's kind of think about it. So financial logic, they're concerned about keeping their clients' data secure. Well, one of the tactics, let's see if I can go back, is let's see, do we see it on here? Credential access. Actually, we don't even see all of on here, so I'm not going to use this as our example. But one of the tactics and techniques is credential access. And so for financial logic, that's going to be a concern for them because all their customers have user credentials tied to their financial accounts. Now, Sumo Pharma, they're concerned about patients' data privacy. Are they concerned about credential access? Well, of course they are, but not in this example. In this case, exfiltration of private data is a major concern. They don't want patients' privacy data being exfiltrated. Now, Sumo Coffee, are they concerned about credential access or exfiltration? Well, of course they are, but more specifically in this case, they're going to be concerned about execution. Their big concern is resource management and making sure that they're monitoring their infrastructure to make sure their apps are as sufficient as possible. And so execution is going to be a concern for them because many executable files will utilize precious computing resources. So each organization has their own concern, and we're going to look at those shortly in the system. A few more slides. Keep jumping through these. Here we go. Now, the insight page, we didn't look at this yet, but you may have even poked around, but the insight page is really going to tell us everything we need to know about or really to start unraveling a security event. So when signals cluster together, Cloud SIEM is going to use these tactics and techniques to name the insights they generate. And ideally, the insight's name is going to point you to how the event occurred or why the adversary is behaving that way. For example, a tactic like discovery or persistence shows the reasons the adversary has. A tactic named like initial access or execution might tell us about the method the adversary used. These names are just starting points, however, and you may need to revise your hypothesis as you continue your investigation. So, for example, an insight based on credential access or called credential access, why did the event occur? Well, it's probably related so the adversaries could take the credentials and utilize them. How did the event occur? Well, by accessing our data. So these very simple names can start to point us to understand why or how these things occurred. Once again, we may need to revise our hypothesis, but it starts to give us at least an indication. And we're going to go through these examples shortly in the lab. So we'll get some hands-on here. Now, this image, it's very blue, but it's still helpful. What I'm trying to show here is a timeline. And the timeline is going to, of course, tell us when the event or events have occurred. And so what we can see from a timeline is we can see whether each signal was triggered at the same time or sequentially, or did everything happen over a period of minutes or hours or days? And so by default, these insights, remember, are going to be these signals that are clustered together within the last 14 days. So what we see here in this, once again, pretty blue, but hopefully you can kind of make it out. In this example is we see signals clustered, signals occurred several days before the others, but some are clustered together more recently. So on the far left, we see kind of at time zero, we see a signal here. About a week later, we see another one. And then about 6 days later, we see 3 happening within a period of, I don't know, you call it a few hours. And so this is interesting. If these had been more spread out, that might be more telling. But now we're starting to get a feel for when these things occurred, and that can help us in our investigation. And then finally, within that investigation, those entities are really going to help us. All of this is really going to help us. But the entities are going to help point to who or what or where the event occurred. That entity, remember, it could be an IP address of a hacked device. It could be the location of an adversary. It could be the location of a database that leaked. It's going to be some sort of who or what or where. And each insight is only going to have one entity that it's clustered around. So let me repeat that again. Each insight only has one entity it's clustered around. So an insight is only going to have one entity associated with it. All right. There we go. So let's go ahead and now start to take a look at our insights. And we're going to go ahead and do so utilizing our lab. So we're going to see those insights that exist within the system, and we're going to pick one. So we're going to take a, let's see, so a couple things, a few different views here. So I want to get back into Sumo Logic, and I want to have my lab guide with me. In our lab guide, we're up to lab 2, and lab 2 is going to have 3 portions. It's going to have lab 2A, 2B, and 2C. Lab 2A is financial logic. Lab 2B is Sumo Pharma, and Lab 2C is Sumo Coffee. We're going to go ahead and go through Lab 2B together, and then I'm not going to do 2C. You can if you want to kind of do it. It's kind of repetitive. And then correspondingly, when we get to Lab 3, we're going to do Lab 3, A, B, or C, depending on if we do Lab 2, A, B, or C. So we're going to do Lab 2B right now. So that's where we want to be. So Lab 2B is Sumo Pharma. And so what are we doing here? Well, while working for Sumo Pharma, we received an alert about an insight called exfiltration with credential access. And we want to find out what happened. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So how do we do so? Well, we're going to follow the guide. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the very top of the screen, and we're going to click on Insights. And what we're going to see here, and the question just came in, is we're going to see a list of all the insights. There's a lot of them. It's going to show us the status of them as well. You have the ability up here to modify the view, changing it from kind of a horizontal to a row or a board, as we call it. Just wanted to show both. The board, I just like this view better. It's just a little cleaner. So what we're seeing here are all the insights. In this case, more specifically, all the insights that are not closed. Now, what we want to do is we want to look for a specific insight. The insight we want to look for is called exfiltration with credential access. And so what we want to do is we want to look for or identify that insight. Now, how do we do that? Well, what we're going to do here is go ahead and view them in the system. So we're going to use our filters for that. So for our filters, we can go ahead and, let's see, sometimes this works with just putting that in exfiltration with credential access. Yeah, it did. So what I did here is for my filter, I just pasted in exfiltration with credential access. I didn't associate it with a specific field, which is fine. When this brings up these insights, and you might have 49, you might have a few less, a few more, it doesn't matter. What I want you to do, and you may notice, as it says in the lab, that there are multiples with the same name. Just go ahead and pick one of them. So I'll pick that one. And by clicking on the insight, now I am starting to view this insight. And now what I'm going to start to be able to understand is what happened. Why is this even interesting or relevant to me? Well, here's what we're starting to see. So on the far left-hand side of the screen, we see the insight, the name. We see the number as well. It's going to provide a number, as you saw, was a sequentially numbering each insight, and it's giving it that MITRE ATT&CK name. We see the status. We see who it's assigned to. If you have a team, you're probably going to need to start to assign things to individuals. We have the entity here. So this is what is clustered around this host name. In this case, it's not an IP address, but it's a host name that's being clustered. And what we see in the middle of the screen here, or on the right-hand side of the screen on the top, is that timeline that I was describing earlier. So we see all these events happen pretty recently, only within the past 12 hours, give or take. But the timeline has started to show us when things happened. And what happened? Well, let's start to look at, see what happened. So going in sequential order, we see a guard duty alert, an unauthorized access credential exfiltration. Now the system has determined that this has a severity of 5. As mentioned, we'll have the ability to modify this up and down as appropriate, but using this value, this rule, the severity is 5. Then, sorry, there we go. Then a GIS guard duty alert got triggered. This was only severity of 1, really not very severe, but it was during the time period. It's from the same host name. It's related. Then what we see here a little bit later is a guard duty alert related to pen test, Kali Linux. So we're starting to see some information about some pen or penetration testing that might be taking place. And then finally, a few hours later, we see a large amount of volume of traffic. So here are EC2's traffic volume unusual. And this is a severity of 8. This is pretty high. We or somebody feels this is important. Now these severities of an 8, a 2, a 1, and a 5 add up to be higher than 12, and that's why they're clustered together in an insight. So what happened? Well, the summary kind of describes it to us, and we could go ahead and put our comments in if we want to down here. But essentially what happened is first there was unauthorized access in the form of credential exfiltration detected by the system. When this occurred, it triggered 2 signals. Then about an hour later, guard duty detected some penetration testing from a user named Kali Linux. And then, as described, several hours later, there was a large amount of traffic. Now, in this case, as it says in the summary, Sumo Pharma is being very proactive in finding vulnerabilities. And in this case, what occurred is they had hired a consulting team to perform penetration tests. This insight was confirmed to be part of their exercise. And so we would take this information and then do something with this. In this case, we could probably want to put a comment and say, this was pen testing authorized, I don't know, by CS. I don't, whatever it might be, and put some information in there. All right. And at this point, we should now be done with this lab 2B. Now, I'm not going to do lab 2C, although I'm not going to do lab 2C just to save a few moments of time. If you want to do it, and we're going to take a break soon, you can. Just like I said, just really do the essence of time. I'm just going to skip it. All right, so let's go now back into, let's go back to our deck. So lab 2, what we did is we chose an insight, we looked at the insight, we explored information about the insight, and then we put some summary. And the recap, as mentioned with Sumo Pharma, which is the one we did, it just was routine penetration testing. So it looked scary. It looked like a large amount of data volume was being utilized and but it was because somebody was just making sure the system could was secure. All right. Let's see. All right, we'll do a few more slides and we'll take a break. Yeah, let's do these. All right, whoop, there we go. So insights, talked about them, spoke highly of them, and they provide a great high-level summary of those potential security events. Now, because of Cloud SIEM's threat intelligence and sophisticated correlation engine, very few insights are false positives, so they're all worth investigating. However, sometimes you want to dig deeper to investigate something and really understand what happened, or you want to do some proactive threat hunting work to find potential problems before they begin impacting your system. The Signals tab is going to help here. The Signals tab is going to list, I don't know, it should show this, it should show 2 images here, but it's okay. The Signals tab is going to show all the signals that were created by rules that have been triggered in our system in the last 14 days. So by default, a Signals tab, which we don't see here, we see entities, but the Signals tab will show us those signals that have been created by the rules that have been triggered. Remember, not all signals are security incidences. After all, there are legitimate reasons why someone might be logged into 2 different devices at the same time, why there have been several failed password attempts on an account. When you click into a signal, and I didn't do this earlier, I should have, you will see the option to see the full details of the record that triggered it, which is going to include information like the IP address, geolocation, threat level, and other information that can aid in your investigation. Let me just show that because I don't think I did earlier. So within here, I can go ahead and click on one of these, and I'm going to get more information. So I can start to see this IP address. Remember, this is where the guard duty had it, and this is the IP address associated with it. It's going to do some geo lookup. It's going to do some other kind of stuff for us. Now the entities tab, which we're showing here, these are going to be populated for rules that have detected an entity in the last 14 days. Each entity is going to have an activity score associated with it. And remember, the activity score is going to be the sum of all the severity scores for all the unique signals associated with that entity. And then once an entity has a 12 or higher activity score, then an insight will be created. So if we have several entities with high scores, those are going to be good places to start looking for threats or start to perform our threat hunt. These context actions, I showed them, but want to just reiterate kind of on here. These are going to be found, actually I didn't show context actions, excuse me. These context actions, as the image is showing right now, are going to be found throughout the Cloud SIEM UI. They're going to be applied or available in the insights, the signals, the entities pages. Whenever you hover next to an entity, as it's showing right here, you may or will see these 6 dots there. You see them. Then we have the ability to go ahead and start to use the context actions. The context actions here allow us to take this, in this case, whatever we're highlighting, and insert the entity into an API call, a DNS lookup, and do other tasks. And an administrator can also add custom context actions as well. So context actions really helpful, and we'll look at the custom ones this afternoon in the admin class. So just a really easy way for you to take this value or this information and view it in or associate it with something else. One of the context actions is going to be the Sumo logic search. So there's going to be several ways to bring your information in Cloud SIEM back into the Sumo logic platform, and using context actions is one of them. And the screenshot is showing exactly how it's used. So for example, let's say we have this IP address that shows up in our Cloud SIEM, and we want to go ahead and look at and see, does that IP address exist within Sumo Logic's records? What we're going to do is, and we're going to do this together shortly, we'll take the IP address, we'll click on the 6 dots, we will have all the actions, and we'll go specifically to Sumo Logic search action. And when we do that, IP address is brought into this environment. Now, of course, we could just copy and paste it into the environment as well, but that doesn't let us use the context actions. And so we want to show you how to use them. All right. And then finally, and we talked about this a little bit, finishing the investigation, excuse me. So this is where you would go ahead and use the comments to put some notes in there. Assign this insight to a colleague. Maybe you want to handle it. Maybe it's more appropriate for somebody else to handle it, and you need to assign it to them. You can do so. You can use those action buttons. As you see here, there are some. We'll go through the process of creating more in the afternoon as well. But we can go ahead and have this created into a Jira ticket or sent via email or Slack or whatever. And then closing the insight and or updating its status is important, because the system is then going to essentially learn from that and utilize that in the future. So those are all important. All right, let's go ahead and let's do lab 3B now. It's going to be pretty quick, and then we're going to take a break. But yeah, let's do that. So let me get my lab guide here. Let me minimize my screen, or full screen it. I got my lab guide right here, and I'm going to go to 3B. 3, yeah, 3. There should be a 3B in here or something. There it is, after 3A. For those of you that can't find the lab guide, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat again, which is fine. I'm not calling the individual out who needs it. Okay, cool. You should see that, Robbie. All right. So in lab 3B, what we want to do is now we want to basically take this insight that we were looking at earlier and kind of wrap it up, finish it up. So we're going to go back into Sumo, back into SIEM. We are going to go back ideally to our insight that we were looking at. Now, if you're not in an insight, or you closed out the screen already, then we're going to want to go to insights, and I'll go through these steps with you just in case We want to go to Insight. We want to look for exfiltration with credential access. We want to pick it. And now we want to basically just follow the steps here. These steps are pretty straightforward. So what we want to do here is look at Sumo Logic to see, is this entity showing up in our logs? Not is it showing in our Cloud SIEM records, but is it showing up in our logs? So we're going to take this entity. We're going to hover kind of near it. When we do, on the right should have 6 dots. We're going to click on it, and then we're going to click Sumo Logic Search. Now, once again, we could have just copied that host name or computer name and just pasted it into Sumo Logic as well, but that wouldn't be as fancy. So when we have it in, the system is now taking this value, whatever it is, in this case, host name, and we're doing a search. And so over the last 15 minutes, we're starting to see some results. Now, what we want to do here is we can go ahead and start to see where this host name is showing up in Sumo Logic in our logs. And that's what we're going to do right now. What we're going to do is we're going to go back into Sumo Logic. And actually, let me get rid of most of these other tabs. And I'm going to do a new log search. I could also use the same tab, but I prefer to use a new one just because. So I'm going to do a new log search. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in that query that's in the lab guide. So I'm going to copy the 3-line query and paste it in. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab this name and paste it in right there. So what I should have, hopefully you followed along. If not, I'll do it again, or at least explain it again. What we did is we took the host name or the entity. We went into Sumo Search and we found the IP, the host name, keep saying IP, the host name. And then what we did is we took that query and put it in here. Now we're going to run this query. What's this query going to do for us? What it's going to do, and it, the lab guide should kind of tell us what it's going to do, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to look at all the records that were ingested into Cloud SIEM, and that's what the first line is doing. Then from those records, we want to look specifically for that host name. And then what we're going to do is count by devices, IPs, and host names to start to get some information to help us identify what this host name was doing around this time frame. So I'm going to go ahead and search. I might need to do more time, but I'm going to try just the last 15 minutes just to see if it. Yeah. Oh, the other thing here is you may need to redo your double quotes. This is an issue with pasting from a PDF. So ideally, your host name and the quotes will be in red like they appear in mine. Once I have that resolved, then I should be able to search. Let me do a longer time frame. Let me do the last 6 hours shipping. Might even need to do more time. Let's do the last 24 hours. So it's looking through. Okay, cool. So now it's starting to give us some more information. So now we see this host name, but now we're starting to associate IPs with it and usernames. And now we can kind of, continue down this rabbit hole. If Rico Dynamite is supposed to be doing penetration testing, or he's part of that penetration organization, makes perfect sense. If Rico Dynamite is no longer employed with our company or is on vacation and has no access to computers, and he is doing something here, then that's quite concerning. And so that's where we can start to get more information and figure out what is occurring here and then do something with it. Now, that's something that we're going to do with it is finish the investigation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and go back into the Cloud SIEM tab. And we're going to go ahead and probably close the insight. We could change the status to in progress if we were still going to work on it, or we can choose to close insight, and then we can go ahead and mark the resolution as appropriate. And then the system will learn from this. So we want to make sure that we put something correct. And so for today, of course, doesn't matter. So we'll go ahead and put no action. And then if I wanted to put some comments, I could, and then I'll go ahead and close the insight. And now it's closed. So now we see it's closed, the status, and we see who closed it. And if I put any notes in, they would be down below here. All right, cool. If you can't find the same insight, it's possible somebody grabbed yours. So yeah, the 481, I just closed it, so you won't find that one. So you might just need to find another one, or we're just really kind of messing around today. So don't worry about it. All right, let's go back to the slides. I think we're going to take a break. I just want to make sure. Let's see. So we finished the investigation. We did the labs. We did the Sumo logic search. We set the status. Just for the recap. There. So let's do our break now. So what we're going to do is we'll take a 10-minute break. Let's see. Yeah, we'll do a 10-minute break. And so when we come back, we'll pick up. We'll do a few more labs, a few more slides as well. And then we'll take that exam and continue with the day. So thank you, everybody, for attending so far. Grab a snack, grab a beverage, do what you need to do, and then come back. I'm going to grab a little snack myself, and then we'll come back and continue. So see you all in a few minutes. Cool. Thank you, everyone. All right, everyone, welcome back. Hopefully you had a good little snack or a break or a beverage or what have you. We're just gonna pick up and keep going on. So um, let's pick up. So back to the deck. And so what I want to look at now or go over is, as it says, customize and tuning your Cloud SIEM environment. So Cloud SIEM rules. There we go. Once we've completed a few investigations, we're going to want to start to add or modify our rules, our data sources, our match lists, and other pieces of the Cloud SIEM puzzle. By doing so, these modifications can help reduce false positives or alert us faster. The most common thing we want to customize are going to be rules and insights. Rules are one of the most important pieces of the Cloud SIEM threat detection engine. All the records that are ingested in Cloud SIEM are compared to every rule in Cloud SIEM. Remember, records are just normalized log messages that have gone through that parsing and formatting and been normalized or standardized. If there's a match, an entity will be extracted, that noun, that host name, that IP address, and then a signal will be created. The entities are going to be tracked, and they're going to correlate with other signals or may correlate with other signals to create insight. And that's where the threat investigations are going to begin, with those signals. Now, in regards to the custom rule type, there we go, sorry. So it's important to note that you don't have to write your rules from scratch. The Sumo Logic content team creates and maintains hundreds of out-of-the-box rules to get you started. And that's what we saw when we looked at the rules, and we saw 683 or whatever it was. 682 of those were probably created by Sumo. Now, sometimes you might need to write a new rule from scratch. You might need to do this if your system has a source that isn't covered by the default rules, or if you're looking for a threat that isn't covered by the default rules. The custom rules are not going to be updated or deleted by Sumo Logic during the regular updates. They're going to be independent from the default rules. And so if you do create a custom rule or rule tuning expression, those rules will not be modified or deleted by Sumo's regular updates, which is important for you to note. Now, there's a bunch of different rule types, specifically 4. We're going to look at most of these today. The match rule is the first one, most simple rule. It's going to be a very simple Boolean statement and check if it's true or false. If it's true, then an entity will be extracted and a signal will be created. For example, we might want to look at an IP address and see if it matches on a banned list. True, false, binary in those options. Now, another type of rule is threshold. This is going to be triggered when a match is found a certain number of times. So for example, if 1 failed login attempt is acceptable, but 5 failed login attempts are not, we can have a threshold rule trigger after the 5th failed login attempt. Chain rules. These are going to fire when certain different events happen in a certain time. So for example, if we wanted to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login attempt within a 1-hour period, then a chain rule would be perfect. Aggregation rules we don't use much, but they're available, so I'm going to discuss them. These are going to be triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time. So if you want to create a rule that looks at a large number of event types from a single device IP, then an aggregation rule would be appropriate. And like I mentioned, we just don't use them much. Now, this is a screenshot of, well, it is a screenshot, but the template for a rule. So when you create a rule or the blank rule template in Cloud SIEM, this is what it's going to look like. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have our if statement. So when a rule is created, it's going to configure the conditions that it needs to match. And so it's going to typically be a short piece of code. It's really going to depend on which type of rule we're writing, but we're going to need to specify if something matches. We can also use our rule tuning expression here, which are going to be small exceptions to rules. They're going to be appended with an end statement. Now, once we've matched the if portion, so if our record matches the expression, then we're saying create a signal. Now here, when we create a signal, this is where we're going to configure some of the signals information. So we're going to configure things like the name, the entity, the description, the MITRE ATT&CK tactic and technique if we want to use that when looking for our rule. And then finally, we have to configure the severity score. So this is going to be on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most severe. We might want to choose a 0 if we want to monitor something, but not necessarily create an insight for it. And higher severity score is more likely to trigger an insight. And we'll go through an example of creating a rule shortly. Now, some best practices for custom rules. And really, before you create a custom rule, these are some things you'll want to keep in mind. Is first, you want to check the existing rules in the system. As mentioned, Sumo has hundreds of built-in rules, and so you might not need to write a new one. Maybe you can just take an existing one and make a small change to it, like adding a rule to an expression or adjusting a severity score. You need to know your system pretty well. You need to understand the schema and log mappings of all the records ingested into Cloud SIEM to write effective rules. And you might need to work with an administrator who knows the information to help you write better rules. And once again, the admin stuff we'll cover in the afternoon. Now, in addition to your system's details about log mappings and metadata, it's important that you understand your company's risk tolerance, their risk appetite, their priorities. And I mentioned this earlier. For example, some companies might want to monitor a large amount of outbound traffic. Now, for measuring a large amount of outbound traffic, a company might not consider it a threat. And so they might consider large amounts of outbound traffic a severity of a 0. Another company might be alarmed by a large amount of outbound traffic and consider it to be data exfiltration. And they might assign the same rule, a severity of 5. A 0, a 5, both are correct. It's just which are more relevant to your company, their risk appetites, as I mentioned earlier. Understanding all the rules is important. If your use case requires a chain rule, but you write a threshold rule, the rule's not going to be as effective or efficient, or it just might not work, period. Kind of a good rule of thumb just in life, but make small changes and test them. So as a best practice, if you're editing a rule or creating a new one, make those small changes. So let's say you have a severity score of an 8 and you want to decrease it to a 2. Don't go from 8 to 2, go from 8 to 7. Let it run for a while. Is it being too noisy or alerting too much? Push it down to a 6 or a 5 and then kind of slowly dial it back, if you will. And then another best practice, and one that we'll mimic today, is saving new rules as a prototype. What this allows you to do is monitor a rule's behavior without creating new insights and alerts. And so we'll do that as a best practice, and it'll just remind you about it. All right, more slides. So rule tuning. Adding a rule tuning expression to an existing rule, as I mentioned earlier, is really going to be the easiest and most simple ways and most common ways to customize your rule. A rule tuning expression is very simply an end statement to an existing rule. It's usually simple logic you add to rules. And as a best practice, you want to add this rule tuning expression when you have a small number of specific exceptions to existing rules. So with rule tuning, you can modify existing rules without rewriting them from scratch. And this is going to let you customize them without doing a lot of work, which avoiding a lot of work, always a good move. Once you've written that tuning expression, you can go ahead and assign that tuning expression to multiple rules. You can also apply multiple tuning expressions to each rule. So there's a lot of flexibility there. We're going to learn how to apply one tuning expression to multiple rules. And we're going to learn how to apply multiple tuning expressions to one rule today. And then, or as well, when you use rule tuning instead of custom rules, once again, remember your tuning expressions are going to be retained when Sumo updates that rule. So you get to take the advantage of the rule that Sumo pushes out to all its users and tweak them or tune them for your own needs. All right. Creating insights. We saw this a similar kind of slide before, but this is another slide. What we want to show here is that ability, or not the ability, the functionality of once a rule is in the system, regardless of if it's a custom rule or one that's been created by Sumo, Cloud SIEM is going to use that to create signals. So as a reminder, if a record matches a rule an entity will be extracted from that record. And that entity, as a reminder, is an IP address, a username, a domain name. It's telling us something about who the potential threat is. Once an entity is in Cloud SIEM's system, Cloud SIEM then will track the total severity score of the signals associated with each entity as an activity score. Once the activity score gets high enough, which is usually 12 by default, then the insight will be created. So I have on the next screen some, I think this will, I hope it will help. Insight clustering and going through a little bit of the math, if you will, of how this works. So on the right side of the screen, let's say we do have 13 signals in the system over the last 2 weeks. So those are shown on the right-hand side of the screen, and each shape on the slide is going to represent a different signal. So each shape and color. So we have pink triangles, we have green squares, and we have blue circles. And for this case, let's assume that the pink triangles are going to be entity A, the green squares will be entity B, and the blue circles will be entity C. Based on the rule that fired, each of these signals has a severity score, which is the number that's shown inside the shape. So we got our shapes or our colors, either way you want to think about it. And remember, we have our activity or our severity scores, excuse me, in the shape or the color. And an entity needs an activity score of 12 before an insight is created. So we need to have entities with a total activity score of 12 before the insight is created. Remember, the activity scores can be the sum of all the severity scores from the last 14 days. So we have our pink triangles, our blue circles, and our green squares. Which of these signals will cluster into an insight? So I want you to think about it for a moment. If you want to put it into the chat, that's fine. Which of the signals is it going to be entity A, entity B, entity C, all the above, none of the above, red and green? Put your answers. All right, seen some answers in there. Now let's see if we have some correct answers. There we go. So I like this illustration. Is moving around, starting to group them. All right, so now let's see what we have. So let's talk about entity A first, which are going to be the pink triangles or red. Those are going to cluster together into an insight. Now there's only 3 of them, but they have a relatively high severity score. The total activity score for this entity A for the red or the pink is 18. We have the 7 plus the 6 plus the 5. That's more than our default value of 12. And so these are going to combine or cluster together to form that insight. In fact, if this entity activity score of 5 was not here, it would still turn into an insight because we would just have 7 plus 6, which is still above 12. Now let's go to the green squares. These are going to cluster together into an insight as well. Now, in this case, the severity scores are pretty low, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But add them up all together, they equal 12. And so 12 is enough to turn into an insight. Now, on the top of the screen, we have our blue circles, entity C. Now, these are not going to cluster into an insight. They're still going to be available on the entity tab, but here the activity score is equal to 10. So until a severity score, a rule triggers a severity score of 2 or higher for that entity, it will cluster into an insight. But until that point, it won't. And so 2 out of 3 cluster into an insight. And what we want to show here is you can have a large number of low severity score signals that won't create an insight. You might have a small number of high severity scores that do create an insight. And so you want to keep this in mind when you create or configure the severity scores of your custom rules. Okay, one more slide, and then we'll do some labs. No, it's slide up, 2 more slides. Sorry, there we go. So what is going to happen if you want to be alerted right away when a certain rule is triggered? Or you don't want to use the default activity score of 12. What do? Well, this is where custom insights are going to help you. Custom insights are going to let you create insights based on a specific signal or a chain of signals, regardless of your severity scores. And so this is really great for known threats that are specific to your system. But you can go ahead and modify those activity scores of 12. That's the default, but it can be modified. And I think we'll show that probably this afternoon. All right, last slide for a little bit. Come on, there we go. So what we just want to remind you here is remember that Cloud SIEM's out of the box rules and insights are great, but you do have flexibility to customize your environment. And so 3 ways that you can customize it are rule tuning expressions to make those small exceptions to existing rules, creating custom rules to go ahead and write logic that's unique to your system or to cover your threats, and then also the custom insights that allow you to get alerts based on just one rule or a chain of rules. Now, what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and jump back into the lab guide. And I'll go ahead and put the lab guide back into the chat in case you can get it earlier or lost it or what have you. And so what we're going to do is grab our lab guide and do the final labs. The last couple of labs. Oh. There we go. So the last couple of labs are going to be lab 4, 5, and 6. And so let's go through them. So lab 4, what we want to do in lab 4 is we want to create a rule tuning expression. And so in this case, as it says here, we want to update some of the firewalls in our system, and we don't want to trigger unnecessary alerts. So we want to go ahead and create a rule tuning expression that will allow us to bypass the firewall related rules. So how do we do that? So let's call the lab guide to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to want to go back into Sumo logic, specifically in the Cloud SIEM. If you're logged out, you shouldn't be timed out, but if you are, maybe you are. Let me go ahead and put those training credentials back in just so you can log back in. We'll want to use the same credentials we used earlier, but just in case we did get kicked out, I just want to make sure everybody can get back in. Once we're in, and ideally we're back on the home page. Oh, all right, I do have to log back in, so let me go ahead and do that. I apologize. I thought I increased the timeout for these, but I did increase the timeout for these, but I guess I don't know, did it in the wrong spot or something. So let me go ahead and log back in. Cool. Sorry about that. So once you log back in, go to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. And then now follow the lab book. So we're going to go into content and we're going to go to rule tuning. Remember, all of our rules show up here, and the ones, the rule tuning show up under rule tuning. So we're going to go to rule tuning. We're going to see the current rule tuning expressions, if there are any, and there should be a few, mostly test rules. And then we're going to go ahead and create one. So let's do it. It's very straightforward, but it's not a reason why we shouldn't do it. So we're going to create the rule. I'd like you to use the naming convention that it recommends. So tuning expression, use your initials and number. We're going to use those initials number a lot today and in the afternoon. So just kind of remember to put that in. Just makes it easier when I have to delete everything. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and tune selected rules. And what we want to do is we want to find a rule that we want to modify. So remember, we wanted to modify our firewall rules. So we're going to go ahead and look for a firewall rule. We should find one that says network firewall alert training. You can choose the other one. Remember, we're just playing around. So if you want to choose something else just to do so, you can. So I've now selected the rule I want to tune. And now I need to put the tuning expression. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab in step 6, the line that says user underscore email. That whole line here. I'm going to do a few things to it. I'm going to have to modify the apostrophes because this is really more artifact PDFs. When you paint them in, they just don't enter in correctly. So what I want to do is I want to redo the apostrophes. And when I redo them, they should turn red. And the whole line should turn red, or the email address should turn red. And what we want to do is we want to modify the email address to include our 3-digit number. And what we're basically doing here is saying create a rule to include or exclude, well, we can decide which we want to do. this. So what we want to do is we're saying don't include records. We have an exclamation point, which is acting as a not training analyst 234. So what we can do is we can very simply just save this or submit it. And now we've created a rule tuning expression. We get back to this screen, which should say rule tuning expression has been created successfully on the bottom. The middle of the screen should show the rule tuning expression, but or end if we go to content and rule tuning. I should have seen line. There we go. Sorry about that. I need to refresh. So now I see my rule tuning expression here, and I see a bunch of other ones. All right, cool. Very straightforward. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Let's do lab 5. Lab 5, we're going to create a custom match rule. So in this case, the scenario is, as it says in the lab, we're concerned about traffic coming from a specific IP address that's not covered by the default rules in Cloud SIEM. And so here we want to create a rule, a match rule, that's going to specify or look for that IP address. So we're going to go to content and we're going to go to rules, because now we're creating a new rule. We already have 600 or so that Sumo has provided, but these aren't what we need. So we need to create a new one. We're going to click create. And now we need to decide which type of rule is it based on what we were talking about earlier. Is it a match? Is it a chain? Well, in this case, we want to create a match rule. We want to look for a specific IP address, very binary, very Boolean. So I'm going to click create. I'm going to need to give it a name once again. So kind of following the naming convention of the one we're using. I'm going to want to make sure it's enabled. And I'm going to need to fill in this stuff in the middle of the screen. Now, at the very bottom of the screen, you should see, you may see this triangle with an exclamation point and a number. What this is showing us are those fields that we have not completed. And so the system is telling us what we need to fill in, which is, I always think is pretty helpful. So, well, let's fill in what we need to fill in. The first thing we want to do is we want to put the specific IP address that we want to look for, or we want the system to look for, we want the rule to look for. So we're going to paste that IP address in. Once again, we're going to need to modify those apostrophes just to thing with related to PDFs, just to format it properly. So we're now telling the system, look for this IP address. If this IP address is found, what do we want to do? Well, now we get to decide what we want to do. What we want to do here, though, is we actually want to use our existing rule tuning expression, because we wanted to use or search for that unique identifier. So we're going to look for hours in here. And now we're going to do the right-hand side of the screen. So basically, if a record matches coming from this IP address and essentially does not include my address, my email address, turn it into a signal. What signal or what entity do we want to utilize for the signal? Well, device IP. That's what we're using right here, and what we've been using a few times today. So we want to use the device IP. We want to give this a unique identifier. So the name, just using the convention we're using. And then we need to put a summary and description. Now for today, I'm just going to put test because I'm lazy. But we would want to put something a little more verbose, but for right now, that's fine. Now here's where we're going to select the severity. Is this a 0? Is it a 1? Is it a 10? Decide. In this case, we'd probably say it's a 1, but we're just playing around. If you want to make it an 8 or a 6, or put whatever you'd like. And then we can decide or describe what tactic in the MITRE ATT&CK framework is being utilized. And so this would be initial access. So we're going to go to our tactics or our tags and go to tactic, and then select this one. And then finally, we want to save this rule as a prototype, that best practice, so that it doesn't create an insight. Now, assuming I have everything filled out, there should not be a triangle here, and there is not. And so I should just be able to click submit. When I click submit, it should say the rule has been created successfully. It should bring me back to that rule. And then once again, if I go to content and rules, I may need to refresh. I'll just refresh real fast. And I should see it in here. Let's see, what's the best way to see it? Try name. I'm just going to do name and do JB. Keep it simple. And that should show the rule. Yeah, there we go. So now I see my rule. Yeah, okay, we're good. Cool. So now we see that match rule. And this is someone who has same initials. Okay, good. So that's lab 5, is creating that custom match rule. Now we have, I think this is the last lab, lab 6. And so now we're going to go ahead and create a custom insight. The rationale or use case here is we want to be alerted right away. So once the custom match rule is triggered, we want to utilize these. So we're going to create a custom insight. So once again, we're going to go to content, not go to rules, not go to rule tuning, but we're going to go to custom insights because that's exactly what we want to create. You'll notice in the screenshot, there's some more options in the content selection. As we'll discuss in the admin class, you have the ability to turn on and off some rights and privileges. And so that's what's happening with this analyst user is it doesn't have full rights. And so it's only limited to see what we want to see. So we're going to go to content, custom insights. We'll see the custom insights in there. But in this case, we're going to create one. We're going to want to name it as we've been doing earlier. Once again, continuing with the naming convention, custom insight, JD234. You'll notice it automatically puts this in as the insight, which is, doesn't make sense, but it's kind of helpful. Also shows us, that we haven't completed filling out everything here. And so we want to use on the left-hand side the triggered portion. What needs to happen in order for the insight to be created? Well, we want the signal to be created when the rule is matched. The rule we want it to match we want it to rules, and we want it to match the rule that we were just created. So I want to match my JB234. I can specify any order. I could specify an exact order. It doesn't really matter in this case. Yeah, it doesn't matter in this case. And so when that's triggered, then the insight, and then we kind of fill in the blanks here with the insight. So the description, so we just test. We can specify severities. But in this case, we're going to keep it kind of simple and just stick with what we have. And then for the tag, as we've been doing, we're going to utilize or associate that initial access tactic. And then once again, click submit. And then I now have a new insight. Now, if I go to back to my insights, I should see my insight as well as a few of yours. Let's do something. Play with the higher severity. Which is cool. All right. Let's go back to the deck. We're just about done with presentation stuff. In fact, we are. So we went through the lab. We went through those 3 labs. So we're done. So now we're pointing to questions. So I know there's been some questions during the class. I know both our assistants have been answering them. So I think we're pretty good on those. Certainly, if there's more questions, feel free to ask. And we'll talk about the exam in a moment. Don't get stressed about it. I'm going to alleviate a lot of concern about it in a few moments, but that's where we're going to head to. Providing the slides. Sure. I can give you the slides. Let me 2 seconds here. Hold on. Here we go. So I'm going to give you the slides. The slides are currently in an environment that we call, in an environment called SlideShare. It's not a great environment for slides, but you should be able to access from there. You should be able to access them for free. We're moving them to a better location in our Learn portal, just they're not there yet. So, but those are access to the slides. Let's go ahead and let me see. Oh, a couple questions here. Questions, where can we see the list of the 600 Sumo Logic rules? So really just by going to content and rules is where you're going to see them. Now, what we're going to show in the afternoon, although I can show it now, is by going to help and going to announcements, you're going to have the ability to see what rule modifications have been made. So here we see there was some rules earlier today, yesterday, day before. Rules are always being updated. And so here's a good way to see them. The difference between creating rules in Sumo, CSE, and SIP, we'll talk about that in the afternoon. So great question. We'll talk about that later. All right, cool. Let's see. I think that's about it for questions. Oh, are you able to create rules outside the Cloud SIEM enterprise? So you can create them in SIP, but those would be Sumo Logic rules. So I'm going to say no, but based on what we go over later in the afternoon, that answer might change a little bit depending on the way I'm reading it. All right. So what I want to talk about now, and if there's more questions, please pop them in, but I want to start the exam and get you guys rolling and kind of get the, explain the schedule for the afternoon as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an assessment together, or you're going to take the assessment. I'm not, I've passed it. The assessment's going to consist of 20 questions. You're going to have 60 minutes to take it. You're not going to need all 60 minutes, but you do have it allocated. And so, feel free to use that much time. You need a 70 to pass. So 15 out of 20 or whatever the math comes out to. That's not right. 14. It's an open resource exam. This exam is going to be open book, open Google, open documentation, open labs, open slide deck that I just sent you, open Sumo Logic documentation. I'm repeating that a few times because I want to harp on that. If you've taken an exam with us before, you kind of know the drill. If you haven't, though, this is going to be new for you. So I'm going to show the process. I'm going to show the process again. I'm going to show it a few times just for repetition. If you already know kind of how to do it and where to go, feel free to start taking the exam and get on your way. But let me show for everybody else how to get to it. And then I'll describe kind of from a time standpoint the rest of the day. So let's get to the exam. How do we get to the exam? Now, it's going to be important that we take this exam as ourselves. I don't want training analyst 543 getting credit for the exam. I want Bob, Bill, and Jennifer getting credit for the exam. And so I'm going to assume, this is a big assumption, but everybody on this call should have their own Sumo Logic account, either the ability to log into it with the password or through their own SSO or SSO or SAML login. So regardless, you want to go to your personal, your private, or your corporate Sumo account. And I'll do that. Actually, I'll mimic. I'll do those steps myself. So I'm going to go ahead, log in to Sumo. If you're logged in already and you want to log out of Sumo, you may not know how. You should, but you may not. If you go to the very bottom left where your training analyst is and click on it, then you have the ability to sign out. And so what I've done is signed out, and now I'm going to sign in as a user. And I'll show you, for those of you that are having issues, we can still help with that. So just hang on. So logging in with my corporate account, and I am logged in. Okay. Once I've logged in, I should be brought home. If not, I want to go to the home tab, and then I want to go to certification. When I click on certification, I should have a screen that looks exactly like this. And I'm going to click Get Certified. When I click on this, it should take me to this next screen, which is the learning environment. If it does not take you to this screen and it loops you back into Sumo Logic, I'll show you how to fix that in a moment. Just there's a lot of edge cases that can occur here. So ideally, I want to be on this screen. Once I'm on this screen, what I have the ability to do is learn more about Sumo Logic. The live training will be put in here. The slides will be put in here. But for today, we want to get certified. So we're going to go to the certification section. Once we're in the certification section, we're going to see all the different certification exams that are available to you. These are all free for you, for your organization, no charge for anybody. And so what you'll want to do is go to the exam that you want to take. The exam you want to take today is Cloud SIEM Fundamentals exam. There's a Cloud SIEM Administration exam. We're going to take that in the afternoon, but we want to do the Cloud SIEM Fundamentals exam. So we're going to select that exam. We're going to, for you, it's going to have a before you start. So it's going to have just really the same kind of steps I told you, 20 questions, 60 minutes, open book. You're going to just want to kind of next on that. Terms of use, just blindly agree. And then you're going to be brought into the exam. Take that long to load, but ready to start. And now you'll take the exam. So question 1, question 2, blah, 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 blah. Once you're done, you'll click submit all answers. And you'll get your result. Now, your result will hopefully be better than mine. And it's important that once you get your result, you click on submit results. If you don't click on this, you don't get credit for the exam, which is not good design. This is not our design. This is an outside testing service we use, but it's an annoying feature, but it's important that you remember to click submit results. So after you get your results, submit them. All right. So what I'd like you to do, and I know there's still questions, so but I want to get everybody started. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the exam right now. We have an hour for the exam, and then the next hour from now is going to be set aside for lunch. So we're going to get together in about 2 hours, really about an hour and 57 minutes is when we'll get back together. So between now and then, I want you to eat lunch and I want you to take the exam. If you want to take the exam first, if you want to eat lunch first, if you need to make a call first, you're an adult. You decide, when you want to do everything. But I'd like you to take the exam, today, of course. Once you're done with the exam, you just disconnect or leave the Zoom call or come back later, however you want to do it, and we'll start again in, like I said, about an hour 47 or 57. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Let me just go through the steps again. Other than that, kind of please start. I will shut up in a few moments to let you kind of do your thing on your own. If you don't, let's see, you have multiple attempts at the exam. So if you don't pass the first time, you can take it again. No harm, no foul. I will put up on the screen. I'll leave it up later. But as a reminder, I'll leave this email address so that you can go ahead and get that URI voucher just by sending your email address or an email from your work address with your job title. So I'll leave that up. The exam, the exam page, let me show this. So some of you, when you clicked on the exam or certification, you get looped back to Sumo Logic. If that's the case, you need to do these steps. It's an SSO feature. It's actually security, but it's annoying. But what you need to do is if you go to certified and like I said, you don't get to the exam, do this. Go to the black bar and go to help and then click on community. When you click on community, as it says here, an email verification should be sent to your inbox. And then when you click on that email, then you should be able to get back into the exam or get to the exam. So I can't provide a direct link because it changes for everybody, but I can just provide those steps. So once again, home, certification, get certified. Wait a few moments, and then get certified. All right, so unless there's any other questions, I'm really going to kind of just shut up and let you take the exam, and then I'm probably going to have a little dinner. You have a little lunch, and we'll get back together in an hour 55. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Like I said, we'll be here for a few moments. Tram and our assistants will be around for a little bit, and then we're going to kind of step out also just to eat, but then we'll come back. Let's see, your account is locked. Unfortunately, we can't do anything for locked accounts. Let's see, just seeing a couple of little issues here, but for everybody else, please start the exam and continue on. let's see, a lot of little issues here. So for the passwords, if you're not, for the emails, they might show up in spam. Always keep that in mind, but they should show up at some point. If you don't have an account, let me, Tram added this earlier, but I can go ahead and send this to Midori. There we go. Oh, actually, that's the wrong link that I sent to you. So many links. There we go. That's to sign up for a free trial. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Yeah, unfortunately, any access, passwords, things like that, we at Sumo can't assist with, unfortunately. No limitation to the exam attempts, so you can take it as many times as you need. I'll leave it at that. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll put the reminder about the Uber Eats, since that's where most of you are interested in. All right, cool. So like I said, I'm saying I have one attempt. Is it safe to ignore? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you have multiple attempts. It should. Emma, if you have problems with it, let me know. It should give you more than one attempt. I know it does say one, but it should just allow you to redo it. All right, cool. So like I said, I'm going to just put myself on mute. I'll check in and be here, but good luck, everybody. And thank you for attending. I hope you're able to join the afternoon portion. If you aren't, I don't know, your loss. But we'll send out recordings of both tomorrow anyhow. So thank you again, and I'll speak to you all shortly.